Greetings, welcome back to Black Bear News, where we are discussing abrupt climate change. And back from my little break, unfortunately, I didn't really have a chance to get much or any footage of the trees, the landscape in my trip because it was a lot of driving and then a lot of just like very condensed family time. So I didn't really have any moments to go off and go hunt around for some pictures, but I can just give you a verbal report, which is basically all through Central California, it is very, very dry. I'm seeing the same signs that I'm seeing in Los Angeles, basically all through Central California and up into where we were camping in the Santa Cruz Mountains. The same things. Not quite as severe in some places as Southern California, but lots of half-dead trees, lots of dead leaves on trees, lots of fully dead trees. Obviously, it's cooler in central and not central, but Northern California. So, and especially on the coast, I don't think they're getting hit by the heat quite as hard. But what I can say is overall, it looks like there's just an overall changing of the climate. And, you know, the more I witness the trees in Los Angeles, the more I think it's not just heat, but it's the rate of, you know, there's definitely been a shift in the climate, and the shift has happened very quickly in the last probably year or two. And the rate of this change, the rate of the shift has not allowed the flora to accommodate or to adjust. So will it adjust? I don't know. The trees in Los Angeles do not look good. As far as elsewhere, I don't know. It's clear that we're in an overall drought, even though we did get a lot of rain at the beginning of last year. And we did get some rain this year. There's just a lot of signs, you know, regarding the drought in Central California, where the agriculture is quite heavy. And of course, you know, lots of not very smart ideas about why, you know, there isn't water for agriculture. You know, obviously a lot of people think that it's being diverted to urban populations, and there's lots of signs calling for dam building. Obviously there's a lot of people in the climate denial camp, probably in the Trump camp, who don't even understand the fact that there is no water, that there's going to be less and less water, and this is just going to be an ongoing problem, and building dams might be a temporary fix, but if there's no water to fill the dams, it won't matter anyway. So just, you know, dumb people with dumb ideas doing dumb things and making dumb signs about it. So whatever. Also, interestingly, a few people alerted me to the fact that I guess Robert Fanny is saying that, you know, doomers, people in the doomer camp or in the it's too late camp are, what is this? What is he saying? That they're oil company shills or something like that? I don't know. Obviously, there's a divide in thinking that there is time to fix this or solve this, or that we can do this through mitigation and through, you know, slowly changing the laws or slowly changing our behavior or following the Paris Agreement. And then there's the camp that is, you know, basically it's too late, and, you know, nothing's going to help. Nothing will save us. You do what you got to do to get your house in order. And I don't know. It's just very interesting. Maybe I'll read this comment from Imogen. Imogen says, "Who is Robert Fanny, aka Scribbler? I'm wondering after seeing this and have for a while wondered about his credentials and links, etc. For example, his reporting on Tesla. Just curious, he may have a good point in his video in regards to doomers, that is, targeting scientists and reporters on the subject of climate change. I don't know. Does anyone else get confused by the volume of information and the differences of measurements, predictions, and explanations, etc.? The warming of the Arctic from below has been mentioned before. Incidentally, something that Fanny reports on says worth keeping an eye on. Or what, while the ice suddenly collapses? I guess further studies illustrating this are good. Why is there not more alarm about this? It's huge. I guess it is all time frames now, but the information seems to be presented increasingly in different forms with different ends. I feel like I am coming down with a bad case of gaslighting. Truth will out, as they say, but we cannot get the commitments and change required to mitigate anything with such volumes of attack and discreditation going on. It feels like being on the school field with a bunch of psychopaths. Oh, wait a minute. That is because we are on the school field with a bunch of psychopaths. All is good. Yeah, I mean, I like that comment because it kind of sums up how I feel about it. There's lots of different takes on where we are, or what can be done, or what we should think about this, or what should we do about this, or, how should we feel about this, et cetera, et cetera. I'm not here to really like down anybody's takes or down anybody's standpoint. You might think, it's kind of silly to call a doomer a shill, because you might think that, people who want to, want investment or money, thrown at green energy, which requires a lot of fossil fuel in order to actually get going, or to create all the solar panels and all the wind farms and all that stuff. You could call green energy advocates shills on some level. They're definitely shills for the industrial civilization, right? Because they think all of this can keep on keeping on, with a little couple of tweaks here and there. And so who knows how far outside reality that viewpoint is. But I mean, I don't think that, I think there's a need for information on this. I think there's a severe lack of coverage of this subject, and the climate change community is so small, and so without support, and so without attention, and the obviously warranted attention that it should have, that it is kind of silly for everybody to be like splintering off into like people that follow certain channels, or this is the only way to think about this, or whatever. I'm probably a pretty weird channel to watch, because I don't subscribe to ultimate doom, and I don't subscribe to like, we're going to fix this. I just subscribe to the fact that, somewhere in between the truth of what is happening to the earth and the possible roads forward, somewhere in there is the realization that, it is a very narrow path, if there is a way forward at all, and that any kind of mitigation efforts are going to have to be worldwide and extreme on many levels. And there just isn't that kind of reaction going on. There just isn't that kind of action happening. You often hear the idea of a world War II type scenario, a Marshall Plan scenario, if you will, an all-out, effort globally to fight climate change or to mitigate climate change, and that is just not happening on any level. And I agree that that is kind of what we need if we're going to have any hope or chance. But look, there isn't. I'm not promoting like one one viewpoint, one monolithic viewpoint. I'm just trying to raise awareness and trying to have a conversation, and I'm trying to widen the scope of the conversation. I'm not trying to narrow the scope of the conversation, which I think is not helpful. That's just me personally. I just don't think it's helpful to narrow the scope of the conversation. To start, saying these people are, idiots, and these people are crazy, and these people are like, there are a lot of idiot, crazy people out there, but I'm just, and it's hard not to fall into that on some level. We're fighting a lack of information. We're fighting a lack of critical thinking, as much as I hate that term. And a really huge problem. There are two really huge problems right now for people at large, and that is selective hearing and emotional thinking. And I think that there's a lot of people guilty of both of those things, or either of those things. That I can't tell you how many times people have commented on this channel about something I said and completely missed everything that I said. If I say, some conspiracies are true, but not all don't believe in all conspiracies, but, maybe figure out the ones that might have more evidence behind them. And somebody says, is there a conspiracy that you don't believe in? Like, you didn't hear what I said a million times in every single video. So selective hearing is a big problem. And the emotional thinking part is huge, because that is what is triggering a lot of people's thought processes right now. Headlines trigger an emotional response. Trump did this, or whatever it might be. Putin said this, and whatever's going on in the world is this like an emotional trigger, and then everybody just really gets wrapped up in the emotion of it. And I understand that people have emotions, and emotions are real for a person, but they're not reality. They're not truth. Truth is outside of your emotions. Science depends on dispassionate observation, right? On getting rid of your emotions and looking at the actual science of it. And I think and emotional thinking is very, very squirrely. It's very tricky, right? You might think that you're completely dispassionate. You might think you're completely without bias, but that bias is sneaky. That bias likes to sneak in there and go like, no, you're really talking through your feelings. You're really not talking through, complete and utter, just evidence and observation. So whatever. I'm rambling. I just think, all these channels are important. Hambone's important, Margot's important, Robert Scribbler's important, Paul Beckwith is important, Guy McPherson is important. All the voices are important. And I think that it's just, we can disagree on these little micro communities or microcosms of thought, but just it's really about the information. Anyways, now that I've taken up a lot of this video with ramble and rant, pardon me. So there's interesting also, so there's been a heat wave going on the East Coast, which I talked about in my last video, and it's still going on. And this heat wave has been talked about for I'm going to say over a week. So we have like definitely a stuck weather pattern. Excuse me, a stuck weather pattern. And, so when I Googled East Coast heat wave today, when I Googled East Coast heat wave a few days ago, a bunch of articles came right up. When I Googled it today, there were articles from 2 months ago, 3 months ago, last year, whatever, anything but articles from today. Like I couldn't find any articles about it, the East Coast heat wave that is still happening, that's going on right now, that people are still talking about. It was very difficult to find the articles about it. So, we're finding little bits of suppression here and there, from people being unsubscribed to YouTube channels, or having, your views maybe, your view counts maybe messed with. Google is definitely, they don't want people to start questioning, like if there's a weather pattern, a heat wave going on for like a week, and they can get you to not like easily find the information, then you might be like, well, maybe this isn't happening. I don't know. It's very confusing to me because I finally did find an article from today, from Inkster, Michigan. The heat index during daytime hours is about 100 degrees. It's oppressive even for the healthiest of people. But imagine being elderly in a high rise with no AC. It's what residents in the Inkster apartment complex are dealing with, and it's been over a week without air. I can't tell you the degrees, but I know it's hotter than it should be, said one resident. I came down from one of my neighbor's house, and his house was just as hot as mine, said Melissa Davis, a resident. And his house was maybe, 92 degrees. Welcome to Thompson Tower in Inkster, a 300-unit building that disabled people, the elderly, and young kids call home. It is hot as heck, said Ebony Johnson, and a hotbox. We just want the problem to be addressed, said Melissa, that's all. They say the tower's air conditioning has been out for roughly a week. Heat in their apartments is unbearable, and there's no word when it will be fixed. When I get upstairs, I've got to take my grandbabies naked, said resident Benita Cox. See, I'm sweating already. Fox 2 called the front office Tuesday afternoon, but they refused to comment about the lack of air conditioning there. We then called the property management company, Independent Management Services, and left a message with no response. Why do they think they can allow people to live like this? Because they have people afraid to speak. They think they're going to get evicted. We don't want to get kicked out because we don't have anywhere to go, Davis said. Fox 2 talked with tenants here back in July about not having AC during that heat wave. Independent management told us that they would have their air back on in a matter of hours. What happened between then and now is anyone's guess. What's clear, though, is how people here feel burnt out. Yeah, I'm just wondering, what happened to the heat wave is still happening. So what happened to the news about it? It's hard for me to cover all this news, but I guess just a quick headline. Strongest typhoon to hit Japan in 25 years. Flights canceled, 7 dead. Hold on. I've missed many days, and nope, I guess not. Sorry, guys, one moment. Okay, here we go. 7 dead as strongest typhoon in quarter century batters Japan. This is from today. Powerful gusts ripped sheeting from rooftops, overturned trucks on bridges, and swept a tanker anchored in Osaka Bay into a bridge to Kansai International Airport. The damage to the bridge left the airport cut off from the mainland and stranded around 3,000 people there. The airport was now conducting safety tests on the undamaged section of the bridge, the official said, but it remained unclear when the passengers could leave. High waves whipped up by the storm also flooded parts of the airport where all flights were canceled. And the severe weather caused power outages and travel chaos across much of the country. Typhoon Jebi made landfall around noon, slamming into the west of the country with winds of up to 216 kilometers per hour. Fast-moving storm quickly crossed the mainland and by nightfall was headed out to sea from Ishikawa in central Japan. News agencies Kyoto and Jiji both reported 7 dead. All right. Again, Japan cannot catch a break. So let's talk about air conditioning. I want to read this or get into this article. In a changing climate, access to cooling is a human right. This is from Truth Out. There's a lot to talk about just with that headline, but maybe I'll just read a bit of this and then talk about that. When I wake up at 5 a.m. on a summer desert morning, it's to catch the only cool moments before the day begins. In a few hours, the temperature will rise past 100 degrees, and by midday, the dashboard thermometer in my car will read 117. I'm guessing this is somewhere in Phoenix. This is by Debbie Weingarten, and this was published on September 2nd. I keep my children's car seats covered with old towels and grocery bags to prevent the buckles from heating up like branding irons. Along the roadsides, the leaves on the orange trees droop, and even the cacti look thirsty. At the Santa Rita Park, dozens of people are stretched out on top of blankets in the grass, taking refuge beneath the few leaning shade trees. Every summer, there are seasonal warnings on the news. Remember to stay hydrated. Never leave your pets or children in an enclosed vehicle. Seek out a cool indoor space during the hottest part of the day. Once during a heat wave, I volunteered in an emergency cooling center. It was in the basement of a nearly abandoned building, down a narrow staircase of teetering bricks. When my eyes adjusted to the dark, I could make out the presence of other human beings sitting against the cement wall or reclining on cots. Most people were quiet, listening to each other breathe, napping occasionally, making small talk, filling water cups from a jug of filtered water by the door. They spent hours there until the sun went down. Then they re-emerged above the ground, but even at night, the temperature stayed at 100 degrees. According to NASA, the year 2017 was the second hottest year in the 138 years that we've been able to measure global temperatures. All 5 of the warmest years on record have taken place since 2010. In the United States and globally, climate change and the resulting heat and drought disproportionately affect those living in poverty, as do extreme weather events, such as hurricanes and wildfires. The Center for Climate and Energy Solutions calls extreme heat the deadliest natural disaster in the United States, killing more people on average, about 600 per year, than hurricanes, lightning, tornadoes, earthquakes, and floods combined. In communities across the country, cooling initiatives are becoming increasingly critical to preventing heat-related illnesses and deaths, especially among low income or homeless populations. On average, each year, the city of Phoenix experiences 110 days above the 100 degrees and dozens of heat-related or heat-caused deaths. Last summer, when temperatures hovered just below 120 degrees, dozens of flights in and out of Phoenix were canceled, the airline stating that it was simply too hot for planes to take off. Maricopa County recorded 155 heat-related or heat-caused deaths in 2017, with the number of fatalities significantly spiking during July. I'm going to skip down. The Centers for Disease Control defines a cooling center as a location, typically an air-conditioned or cooled building that's been designated as a site to provide respite and safety during extreme heat. So, I don't know. I was talking about cooling, becoming a human right, or, you know, starting to become on the list of things that people have a right to. It's interesting. It's just, so a friend of mine who I really have a lot of respect and admiration for on Facebook, you know, posts some very like, he's just good at posting very true things that, but a lot of people are kind of like, they might be outside of the norm of like politically correct, I guess. Anyways, he had a post one day, and it said, the only human right you're born with is the right to breathe air, or something like that. And I was like, yeah, I mean, in a way, you know, a human right is something that we grant to each other, but that we, you know, we grant these human rights to each other, but as long as those rights are under our control, right? Like, you know, people might argue that every human has, you know, food is a human right, but only as long as we have control of the food supply, right? If, you know, natural law is above whatever human law might, you know, might exist in the world, whatever human rights or human laws might, whatever it is that we think is fair and equitable to each other. It's like, but natural law is like, we, you know, natural law doesn't care about us. So, you know, if you're thinking in the terms of climate change, if you're thinking in terms of the environment or how Earth manages itself or its own, you know, its resources, we really don't have a right to anything. We don't have a right to anything. We have a right to survive and scratch out an existence. That's about it. You know, we only have human rights as long as we are able to control our environment, right? And that's what humans are good at doing, is controlling their environment. But you can only control it for so long because, well, you could probably control it indefinitely if we were smart about it, but we're not all that smart about it. So by mismanaging our environment, by controlling our environment, but yet mismanaging the long-term effects of controlling the environment, we are setting ourselves up to basically lose all of our human rights because we are going to lose food, we're going to lose cooling, we're going to lose medical care, we're going to lose education. We're going to lose all those things. We're going to lose our lives. And that, you know, it's just not going to matter. You know, I don't know. This is just a very weird and tricky, issue. You know, while human beings are worried about the human right to cooling, and clearly the poor, people in third world countries, people without access to, obviously, air conditioning, and or the ability to escape their environment, those people are going to be affected worst and first. And it's a terrible thing. And yet, at some point, we're not going to be able to control this. At some point, the grid's going to go down, and it's not going to matter whether, you know, whether there's availability of cooling. It's just not going to matter. We're not going to be able to control that part of the environment as climate change progresses. As much as we would like to grant others, you know, the ability to seek and access cooling, we're all going to have a very big problem with that. And obviously the rich are going to be last to feel this, and people in richer countries are going to be last to feel these effects. So I don't know, you know, yeah, it would be nice if we could grant each other the right to cooling for forever and ever, indefinitely, but that's going to come to an end. I don't know. There was actually something else I wanted to say about this, but, you know, it's an interesting thing that you know, just human rights or human equality is like something that is abstract. It's something that, you know, I like, I enjoy. I am a proponent of human equality and human rights for everyone. I would like to think that everybody should have the right to, you know, to eat, to get medical care, to have a decent standard of living. But again, even a standard of living is completely arbitrary and completely made up. It's a complete, you know, it's a it's a byproduct of our industrial civilization, right? So, and our industrial civilization is soon to come to an end. So what, you know, what can we be sure of in the future as far as like how humans treat each other, or how humans, you know, I mean, how humans treat the earth might be a good sign of like, what is our ultimate fate? Moving on. I wanted to read this last article because it's just really, really good. And where is it? Robin sent me this. A Pyrrhic Climate. What does it mean to fight and win an impossible war? A recent debate in Twitter's climate community illuminated a schism between those arguing that mitigating climate change is impossible and those exhorting others to continue to fight climate change. Going back to the beginning of this video, there is a schism. While the debate yielded no definitive answers, it brought up important questions for those who focus their life on addressing this issue. What does it mean to fight climate change today? Is mitigation really impossible? How would we know? If we want any chance of winning the fight, we have to confront which parts of it may be impossible to win, and we have to have a sense of what it really means to fight climate change. Let's start with what's impossible. Take one sector of the economy that needs to be decarbonized: food. Food is heavily petroleum dependent in growing, processing, and in its complex supply chains. Basically, every single calorie consumed by someone in the global north and much of the south is derived from petroleum, either at that point of production or by being moved around in planes, trains, and ships. What would it take to decarbonize industrial agriculture? And of course, food as a human right allows population to grow beyond sustainability. First, we would have to stop using petroleum-based fertilizers and petroleum-derived pesticides. The implication of that is we'll have a lot less food in the world. That's just a reality of farming. High, dense food production relies on lots of petroleum inputs. I've worked on farms. There's lots of pests, an increasing number due to climate change, and the soil is now weak thanks to industrial ag. For all the talk of agroecology, which is great, we can't get around those realities easily. It also means food will be regionally and seasonally dependent, e.g. no more avocados in most of the global north. Millennials, one consolation in the world gone. In a world with less food, the implication is 1, food prices will rise, and 2, populations will contract. The former because there is simply less of it, the latter because humans are physical beings whose biomass depends on caloric intake that food provides. Less food means fewer bodies. Those processes can be managed stably over decades, or they can happen swiftly and violently. Either way, the administrative and political obstacles to achieving this kind of transition are today virtually impossible. What do you think are the chances that the US will decide to voluntarily take on the consequences of higher food prices and fewer humans? 0 or almost 0? What about coordinating this shift globally? Will India and Brazil scale down their agriculture? Non-mechanized pre-industrial agriculture supported about 1 billion humans in the early 19th century. It probably can't support a whole lot more than that. There are 7.3 billion people today because petroleum can grow a lot more food. How do we manage a population decline between 7 to 1 billion, from 7 to 1 billion people when we de-mechanize agriculture? It also means a huge chunk of the population, half, say, maybe somewhere more or less, goes back to work on farms or foraging. Raise your hand if you want to go work on a farm. This is just agriculture, but what if we tried to decarbonize aviation by fueling airplanes with biofuels from this limited agricultural capacity? On Twitter, Jalabib recently calculated that it would take 68% of the Earth's current productive land to fuel today's aviation industry. So decarbonizing aviation and ag means either using way more land than we have available or grounding most planes. What's the messaging we're going to use to tell everyone they can't fly any longer? How possible will it be politically to shut down aviation? We can't even get the airlines to stop beating up passengers and killing dogs. Decarbonizing electricity is a little easier. Not easy, but possible, maybe. But again, it entails relying on less dense energy, which, depending on subsidies and supply chains, could mean higher electricity prices or simply less availability. Even manufacturing, maintaining, and shipping turbines and solar panels and batteries depends on petroleum-heavy supply chains. Decarbonizing that supply chain means more expensive panels and turbines. The technical challenges are heavy enough. Again, what do you think are the political difficulties involved in convincing people to accept policies that may well lead to less available and reliable electricity or more expensive access? Is it impossible? This is just basic electricity cost politics. This doesn't even get into the thick, tangled webs of inertia, vested interests, and legal labyrinths keeping the US grid system from transforming. We can't definitively say what is possible or not. Doing otherwise exceeds our mandates as fallible tree monkeys with inflated domes. At the same time, declaring that mitigation looks impossible right now is not nihilistic doomerism, as many of the more prominent media personalities in the debate charged. It's just pretty plausible based on the facts. It's probably true to say it's unhelpful to go about confidently declaring mitigation impossible. True to say we should never give up the fight, but the challenges are way more immense than most people who get paid to talk about this stuff want to discuss. Boom, boom, and boom. So this brings us to fighting. What does it mean to fight and win a potentially impossible war? Is shutting down one pipeline going to spark the long-term coordinated transition from industrial ag to non-mechanized ag and the stable decline in population from 7 to 1 billion people? No. So is shutting down a pipeline really fighting? Is a college divesting from fossil fuels going to realistically yield the massive injection of public funds necessary for coordinating a national decarbonization of the grid? Probably not. So is it still fighting? Is chastising people for eating meat when meat consumption is exploding globally, or a few individuals in the wealthy world choosing to eat less meat, really going to halt deforestation, dismantle global development patterns, and rewild the land? Nah. So this fighting climate change, are we fighting to win or are we fighting for vanity? In the middle of the Twitter debate, responding to one of my points, a random commenter suggested that I'm not doing the work. It's common for high-profile climate folk to cast people talking about the immense obstacles to mitigation as privileged keyboard warriors sitting on the sidelines criticizing the doers. I'm just alerting all of y'all selective hearing types. So let me offer a disclaimer here by saying that I've spent my entire adult life, which is only about a dozen years, albeit, throwing everything I've got at this problem. I've worked on it from realms of politics, nonprofit advocacy, street activism, entrepreneurship, media, and academia. Have lived precariously and haven't lived in the same house for more than 12 months in the past 12 years, chasing opportunities to try to impact this problem. My relationships, mental health, physical well-being, and personal stability have suffered for the past 12 to 13 years thanks to committing to the work. Many others can say the same. I'm frustrated because for the past 12 years, I've watched fellow activists doing the same bullshit over and over again, pouring their whole beautiful selves into this fight and getting not only no progress, but continual momentum in the opposite direction. I see media personalities and movement leaders telling us grunts to work on the same garbage that hasn't been working for the past 10 years or 40 years, depending on the campaign, and do it with a grim, gritty smile on our faces. Keep fighting. Victory. Friends, it ain't working. Spinning our wheels on the same old racetrack isn't going to carry us into that fine sunset. People in these positions of power, privilege, and leadership, those who are guiding the conversation on climate change and the broader public conversation, have better get really goddamn radical right now. The incremental nudges that they've been waving as a flag to freedom are infantile nonsense at best and vain, self-aggrandizing distractions at worst. I don't want to see one more essay about how some centrist politician is a climate hero for some half-hearted climate posturing once in 2007. Or one more fawning profile of a monopolistic corporation that decided to power its energy-sucking data center with solar panels. Tiny victories in our current political and economic paradigm are losses. If we're not working to completely fill every seat in the nation's state and federal governments with radical climate hawks, then we're not serious. Boom. If we're not planning to expropriate all fossil fuel companies to shut them down by any means necessary, then we're not serious. Boom. If we're not agreeing on and then religiously evangelizing a comprehensive, desirable vision for a completely decarbonized world, then we're not serious. If we're not working to bend or change the law to build local, collectively owned and managed microgrids currently illegal in much of the US, in every single neighborhood in the country, then we're not serious. If we're not personally running for office, training as thinkers, inventors, engineers, etc., and talking relentlessly about this as at risk to our reputations, then we're not serious. If we're not organizing people into tightly coordinated units to mobilize to disrupt supply chains or congressional committee meetings, then we're not serious. If we're not talking about a 99.99999% capital tax rate on billionaires, millionaires, and large companies to fund the transition, if we're not pushing for extensive social services, free healthcare, free energy, guaranteed income, free higher education, and access to cooling that can make everyone more resilient to climate impacts, and we're not advocating for permanently banning monopolies and capping personal wealth and totally trashing our current economic paradigm in favor of another, then we're not serious. Let's get serious. Life depends on it. That was an amazing article. That was very very motivating, and it's true. This article gets closer to the truth than 90% of the stuff I read, 95% of the stuff I read. Because most of what we are doing right now is absolute bullshit. Yeah, if we're not talking about major radical system upending changes, then we're not talking about anything. If we're talking about clean energy or building wind turbines or driving electric cars, we're not talking about anything. We're talking about bullshit. So, like, if you're serious, about this, we need to be talking about, shutting down nuclear power plants, shutting down the electric grid, or, localizing the electric grid, or just a massive, we really need we need to shut down aviation. We need to shut down shipping. We need to have farming be the main thrust of civilization again at the moment, if we're going to feed people. And there's a lot of moral dilemmas at stake. There's a lot of, getting off fossil fuels means taking down our population. massively taking down our population. How do you do that? You know, you do that. You know, I don't know how you do that politically. I don't know how you do that socially, but um, you really have to start either incentivizing or mandating that, people can only have so many kids, or no kids, for a window of time. And honestly, we have a massive system of healthcare. We are engaged in keeping people alive for, 10 or 20 or 30 years longer than they might otherwise live. And this healthcare system is run on what? Fossil fuels. That's a moral dilemma. Do we keep people, do we, we have a lot of investment in, medicine and cures and, for what though? I mean, we all die. We're all going to die. I know it really sucks. I know this is a sucky subject right now. And if somebody said, well, you're going to live to be 60, but if you had modern medicine at your beck and call, you could possibly live to be 95. Would I honestly want to choose to, no, I'm good at 60, I'm out. It's not that long from now for me. I personally, would have a tough time to like, okay, well, I guess, but the thing is we're extending, human life by a decade or two at the cost of what? At the cost of the entire civilization, at the cost of the entire environment, and at the cost of other species. I mean, that's a big one too. Are people going to choose to not live as long or not have access to the healthcare and the medicine that they might otherwise have access to? Lots of big questions and lots of things to think about. But if we're actually going to address this on a realistic level, we're going to have to address all of those things. All of those things must be accounted for. And we're going to have to get tough. We're going to have to be tough about it. It's going to be not very fun and not very nice to think about what the actual realities are. But the actual realities are, the actual reality is we deal with it or it will be dealt to us. We can either figure out a way to take the population down, gradually by about 6 billion, or we will lose 6 billion people in a not very pretty way because we didn't think about it or we didn't deal with it. And that could possibly be in the next 5 to 10 years, realistically. And so those are the questions that we will or will not answer. That's all I have for you tonight. Thank you so much for your eyes, your ears, and your conscience. If you'd like to support this channel, you can do so at the links below. Until next time, peace.